So over the 120 some odd years or so, multiple business units have started up their own websites. And we've been able to, from a corporate standpoint, we've been able to keep those websites consistent in architecture and product selection and all that. But one of the problem statements we have is across the different businesses, the websites themselves have a different UI and all have different login IDs, right? So if you're an insurance customer and a retirement customer, first, thank you very much. But at this point, you'll have to log in with your insurance credential, log in with your retirement credential. We're counting on you to be smart enough to figure out what credential to use. By the way, a little plug for my company. If you don't believe me, please go out and buy one of each of our products. Self-service password reset across these websites has been consistent to a specific level of security, but within each of the BUs, we've kind of departed. So you might have 3 challenge questions over here. We might be doing some level of risk-based authentication over here. And the same situation exists across our user types, right? So, the type that we're more familiar with is kind of the retail customer that's going in to check their account balance, et cetera. But it's important to know that we have websites that are dedicated towards intermediaries. In fact, a good portion of our book of business is sold through third parties. And if they sell insurance for us and sell annuities for us, again, if there's any agents in here, thank you, but you have a login for each. So this is the problem that we're solving over time. So logically, this is basically what our shop has looked like, right? We've been very consistent about the security tools we put in place. This picture actually makes it look very good, right? It looks like we have one web access management system, and if you log in, you get access to everything. Architecturally, that's true, but if you're coming in here as Patty, and you're logged into app 1, and then you happen to click a link that takes you to app 2, you'll get a nice message that says, hey, I know who you are, and I recognize your session, but you're not authorized, right? So, and again, this is the problem we've been solving. The other thing about this diagram that's misleading, and even within Pru, people have said to me, hey, you run the centralized single sign-on platform. Do me a favor, run a report and see who's using Yahoo as their email address, or how many phone numbers do we have registered and stuff like that. All that kind of juicy stuff is listed back here in the different customer databases, repositories, admin platforms, et cetera. And the business unit specific apps are the only ones that really know how to interact with the good stuff, I keep calling it. So, anything that we want to do around, hey, this person's enrolling for their account, and according to their record, it looks like they should be in Detroit, but they're logging in from Florida right now. That's probably a concern. That good data is back here, and there's a lot of other examples of why we need access to that. So we, and again, this is a huge company. I like to use the metaphor of the oil tanker. Doesn't stop at a dime, turn around, et cetera. We've been working on this for several years at this point, but what we're striving for is to consolidate IDs across applications. So if you're an individual and you do business with Prudential, you log in once, and we know you across all our lines of business. All the self-service password reset functionality, striving to get that consistent. And one thing, and I get this question a lot, we don't have any desire for a number of reasons to say, oh, you're an agent that happens to own product, we're gonna give you one login. We're always gonna be segmented by those 3 customer types that I mentioned, the institutional, the individual, and the intermediary. So this is what we're working on now. So it's been a couple of years now. We implemented a virtual directory server, and I love this diagram because it takes about a second and a half to put that arrow there, but that represents not only technical challenges about figuring out how to keep millions of records in sync and validating cache, and are we going to do a pass-through or really have a live cache there, but it also represents a lot of political and governance, et cetera, debate to kind of make everyone see this vision. But this is what we're working towards. So same consistent web access management platform, but we're looking to consolidate the number of websites we have down to one portal that's going to make services calls. And again, this diagram only covers the identity and access management part of what we're doing, but hand in hand with that, all of these different back-end applications are moving towards a services architecture. And that makes this pretty fun, because I have to, at this layer, I have to say, hey, this customer has two different products, so when I interact with this back-end, I have to remember that we're starting to call them legacy IDs. Everything seems to become legacy very quickly, right? Their legacy ID is the ID that they created when we only knew them as a retirement customer, or their legacy ID is what we knew when they were an insurance customer. So we're doing some sophisticated stuff up at the centralized web access management layer to make all the service calls work across the business unit of apps with kind of minimal impact and minimal change to the actual back-end app. A lot of the things that I mentioned I wanted are on the roadmap, right? So around risk-based authentication, getting one centralized self-service there with a consistent layer across all the BUs. A lot of the business units implemented things in the absence of us having something centralized and consistent. So I'm getting a lot of people saying, hey, can I finally decommission XYZ because you're going to do it for me at the centralized level? And the answer is yes. I should have mentioned in the beginning, any questions, comments, concerns, please make this interactive. Any questions so far with what we're shooting for here? Okay. So what are the benefits of this? One set of credentials for our users, additional identity and access management capabilities, and consolidation of repositories. So in a lot of cases, we had an LDAP directory sitting there just for the purposes of the portal or the app, whatever, having one place to go for some of this data. Those things are starting to migrate to the VDS now, as well as all the admin interfaces that were only there to kind of keep a physical repository in sync. So the entire architecture is getting simpler. The last point here, once you have a Swiss Army knife, there's my Swiss Army knife, even though I'm kind of a Leatherman guy. The thing that I like about having a VDS in-house is other opportunities come up, and we're always able to say, hey, can the VDS help here? So some examples, we do a lot of work with Federated Identity, with sending assertions to cloud providers and other business partners and all that. And a lot of times we have to go to some business unit application to find your license number or whatever the piece of PII is that I need to assert your identity out to a third party. What we're looking to do now is create a virtual layer that's able to connect into all the different backend repositories and just present our federated platform with one directory. So put all the burden of actually finding this data at the VDS level and just call it from the federated level. Another example, we're migrating to Office 365 out in the cloud right now. And as we went through the process, we had to make some changes to AD, which terrifies everyone, right? The AD group just wants to kind of leave it running consistently, leave it alone. They brag about how they've been up for 20 years. That's because they've never changed anything. So we kind of came in and said, hey, we've got this VDS. We can make it look like we've made these changes and added these new attributes without making any real changes to AD. So it's a nice kind of tool to have in your pocket over time. In terms of lessons learned, one of the interesting things about running a project when you're bringing in a VDS is explaining to people what a VDS is. And the surprise that I was surprised is you find yourself almost competing with other projects, right? So one specifically is the whole kind of MDM effort. And I found myself explaining over and over again, not competing with you guys, still need to focus on mastering data. This is different, right? And one of the analogies I like to use is, if you're mastering data across the company and all that, and you accidentally mailed John Smith a letter because he lived next to the other John Smith on the same block, and then you kind of thought it was him. that's okay. We accidentally marketed to one extra guy. At the VDS level, the data's got to be right? So if you log into your account and you see John Smith's account, that's not right? So we kind of rely on a number of other projects to figure out, either through self-identification, user logs in and says, I already have an account over here, let's link them, or the kind of MDM correlation data cleansing projects. They all have to happen in the background so that I get that ID that I can rely on that says, yes, this user is this user, start merging them and putting it on the screen at the same time. Groups versus attributes. I'm not sure if you guys have had experience with this, but I personally loathe groups. Think they should be banned from the planet. And my thing is, if the platform that's calling the directory supports it, go with attributes at all costs, right? Replicating groups around that have millions of users in them, and watching the problems that cause in the downstream systems is not fun. So, attributes if you can do it. And did you guys hear Petraeus, by the way? I was nervous about putting lessons learned up here, because he said it's not a lesson learned until you've made institutional changes and institutionalized it and all that. So these are, I forget what he said I'm supposed to say instead. It's not a lesson learned, it's a lesson something. Anybody? Identify, thank you. So this is one that, this last one here, systems grow roots, continuously identifying it, right? So you have any platform that's been around for 10 years or so, other things have kind of spawned off that are not obvious, right? You find out, it looks like, hey, just putting a record in that database puts a record in the database, but what you don't realize is someone's reading that log and that's triggering some other event, and it's interfacing with a CRM platform that you've never heard of and all. So, anytime you're gonna undertake something like this, put some time in to really go through with not just the guy that owns the system, but the whole ecosystem that's been built around it, and start talking about what you're gonna, rip, replace, modify, et cetera, and start taking people very seriously when they say, hey, did you know that thing interfaces with that thing, and start getting into it. At this point, any questions? Hey, Mon, you gotta ask me a question. No, I'm just kidding. Yes?
So your point about groups versus attributes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the traditional benefits of groups, at least for the developers building these customer-facing applications, is There we go. Let me try that again. Is that better?
No, well, we're being recorded, so
okay.
Don't get nervous. But I was supposed to tell you to wait for the mic.
Oh, fair enough. So, one of the benefits to developers who are building externally facing applications of leveraging groups
Mm-hmm.
that they create in their apps, which is part of the problem in your case, is that they can manage permissions at a central group level, as opposed to having to cascade them all the way down to individual users when there's a change. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if as you guys are trying to move to attributes, how are you rationalizing the management of attributes across your user base when you want to make like one high-level change?
That's a good question. I think there's a point where groups make sense, right? And it's probably a number, and I don't know what the number is. Maybe it's 100,000, maybe it's 10,000. We can argue over beers, right? But I think when you come up with a requirement that has you putting 1 million people in a group, you got to kind of sanity check that a little bit and say, maybe there's a different way to identify them. Maybe they belong in their own OU. We'll just leave them there forever, or that kind of thing. It gets very costly to try to keep that group going, right? One of the things we did is we had a portal platform that we didn't have any choice on. It needed to see that you were in a group. It was just the way it was designed, and we tried to make the VDS be the thing that, even though these people weren't in a group, kind of spun its wheels and made it look like they were in groups. And we, with the help of Radiant, kind of figured out how to do that a lot better. But just logically, it would have made more sense if the platform was flexible enough to say, do you have this attribute instead of do you have this group? It sounds simple, right? But if the platform expects the directory to be a certain way, you're kind of stuck. So that answer your question?
It does. But maybe you can elaborate. So, you say that there's a big cost to groups. Can you elaborate on what that cost is and how you guys experienced it?
With stuff like replication, with waking up one morning and looking at a log that says, your group's so big I can't reliably tell you if it replicated or not. Like stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
It's just, there's a cost in having big groups.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't mention it, but I should have. All of the user administration on all of these external facing sites has always been done through a consistent API, right? So the person that's saying, hey, I want to create an ID for Joe and he's a retirement user, right? And that person calls an API that just gives him the entitlement. Really has no idea if he got an attribute or a group or what, right? And all the apps that are kind of homegrown call a similar API to say, tell me this guy's entitlements, and we give him over, right? That API has lived probably 15, 16 years now, right? And the underlying user repository, as we changed the web access management platform over time, has gone from a database where these things were attributes on a table somewhere to a real LDAP directory, and the API interface has never changed. So this is a kind of a VDS talk, but if we were having how do you future-proof? I'm kind of a services fan. Everyone else seems to be a services fan now, right? But 15 years ago, people were saying, get out of my way, just give me the SDK. Why are you, going through the cost and burden of creating this layer and developing it yourself and all that? And it's saved us, I'm going on 3 times now. It's like one of the best investments I ever made is building that services layer. We have a question in the back, and I'm supposed to tell you, wait for the microphone.
Hi, I have a question on the self-service password reset.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have different flavors and versions for the different BUs and the different user types, or is it a streamlined process?
We do have different flavors. Well, so I'll answer the question, but the answer is going to be a moment in time answer, right? So if you went back 2 years ago, every BU had a different flavor, even for the same user type. So if you were a insurance customer, we might say, give me your policy number and some other PII. If you were a retirement customer, we might say, give me your email address on file. What we're doing, and again, nothing goes fast in a big effort like this, is across the BUs kind of getting everyone together and saying, you were asking for 7 levels of identification and you were only asking for 5. Can you guys agree on maybe 6, right? And what we're sprinkling into the mix is the ability to start doing risk-based also. So we can hopefully ask for less, but kind of count on the user being in a physical location, et cetera, that makes sense for that user. So we're hoping that it becomes streamlined, but that's what the risk-based is getting me. Now across the user types, if you're an agent versus an individual, the enrollment processes are much different, just because of the nature of the relationship. Thank you. Dieter. Wait for the microphone, Dieter.
Can you talk a little bit about how you talk to the stakeholders about this? Do they view this as a security initiative, or do they view this as a customer experience initiative? And where do you talk about it differently to different constituents?
No, that's a great question. So, a little bit about where I am in the organization, right? Prudential, I mentioned, has a number of different business units. I'm in corporate, so there's the old joke, I'm from corporate, I'm here to help, and people say, get out of my way, I'm making money, right? So anytime I try to do something from a security standpoint, internally I have to sell it. I have to either scare you about the risks of not doing it, or sell the benefits of efficiency and doing it, right? And it's a little counterintuitive. Sometimes in certain spaces, I wish there was like a regulation that said, thou shalt do this by 2017. There's one coming in the UK. I'm like, I wish we had one of that here. That would make my sales job easier. I would just say, hey, we have to do this next year, period. The effort that I was able to get done here was driven as a let's make life easier for the customer, business initiative, and had a lot of stakeholders at the highest levels in the organization, which made it possible, right? So you can imagine if you're in corporate and you say, do me a favor, give me all your data. I want to put it in a repository with this other business unit's data. As the security guy, it's easy to kind of ignore me, laugh at me, et cetera. When I say, hey, the chief customer officer is looking for this stuff, then all of a sudden they say, hey, would you like to get that in batch or real time? So the conversation's a little different when you have the right guy behind you. I hope that answered.
Yeah, thank you. One more quick one.
Mm-hmm.
So do you guys have a separate employee-focused team and a separate customer team, or is it all one identity and access management team that is responsible for all your constituents?
It's the same team. So I'm responsible for single sign-on both on the intranet, the internet, which we covered here, and everything in between. I have my lead federation guy here, right, for all the cloud work and inbound SAML that we're doing. But there are interesting points where they intersect. So we use a whole different security system for the intranet than we do for the internet. But there's a lot of times where I'm a customer, so I want to look at my own 401k. I want to look at my own benefits that Prudential happens to provide. So we've done neat things over the years about creating single sign-on between the two. And one of the things that we're seeing now is everything we thought we had figured out a couple of years ago, we have to rethink with mobile and MDM and MAM and all the fun stuff that's coming. So it's the same organization, but two different platforms with some bridging in between. Any other questions? Give it 1 second, I'm sorry.
For your external identities,
Mm-hmm.
is it all consumers, or do you also have organizations that are your customers trying to leverage their existing credentials?
So, across the different business lines, we have different models, right? So on the more retail-facing businesses, it's a guy logging in with an ID and password. The businesses that we call institutional, so the retirement, the group insurance, we're typically via SAML, right, logging people in, from their intranet. So, guy at company XYZ clicks a link and he's logged into Prudential and everything works great 99% of the time. So different audiences. What we're doing now, and it brings up a good point, with the some of the risk-based stuff, right? A lot of that's based on the moment that you log in, looking to see if your, the actual creation of your session made sense. And we're kind of thinking, all right, well, if you've, where do I do that? Do I start talking to the institution and saying, hey, I want to trust that login a little more. What are you guys doing about risk-based? Or should I, even though I have a valid SAML assertion, should I look at it and say, oh, this really didn't come from someone? So we're having that talk with a lot of our bigger clients. Any other questions? Okay, at this moment, I'd like to bring Eric Anderson up. Thank you.